Well, hi, everybody. Whoops. It kind of helps to have the microphone right in front of me. Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Welcome to what's supposed to be the Joe and Joe Weather Show, but I've been calling him for the last 5 minutes to get him on the air, and he hasn't answered yet. So I don't know if he forgot or he's wolfing down his dinner, but we will try to get him in the meantime. So we will just start off with me. One of those rare times here that we actually have some snow in the forecast, small system nonetheless. And last night, some places in parts of eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England got anywhere from just a few flurries to a couple of places getting as much as an inch. And Scott Briller pointing out, the chairman, he's not here tonight because his mom has got knee issues, and we wish you well. If you got to get new knees, don't worry. It's like going to Home Depot. They just kind of put you on the rack, put the knees in. You recover for a week or two, and then you're on your way, and you'll be walking miles. So take care of yourself. Anyhow, my mom had both her knees done, and there's a lot of folks that I know that have had various parts of their body replaced. And that's when I stopped running, when I realized if someone I knew that ran on a regular basis wound up having both knees and both hips replaced and hadn't even hit the age of 50 yet. And it's like, you know what? I'm not doing that. So anyway. Okay, so I just saw David Schwartz said from Judah Cohen. So far this winter, a stratosphere troposphere coupling of cold polar cap heights and a positive AO have swamped the water. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, last year when we had the split in the polar vortex, it didn't couple with the bottom part of the atmosphere because the Pacific jet was too strong. And now, of course, that it did couple by staying strong up there, the Pacific jet is, well, it's different. The pattern is different from last year. It just has the same not favorable outcome for snow and cold in the east. There are numerous ways where you can have a weather pattern such that the weather in the east, and particularly in the northeast and in the northern mid-Atlantic states, is not a positive one for snow. There's not just one way. One way is to kind of have a fire hose jet across the Pacific. We don't have that, but we do have a trough deep down in the west. We actually have a fire hose jet in the Atlantic that going straight across from west to east, and that isn't helpful because the lack of traffic means that these weather systems, when they come off the East Coast, they want to shoot out straight to the east rather than make a turn and move northward. This one's going to try to make the turn, and it's a question of how compact it is. It is it's kind of like a tight little ball. The NAM model and the NAM model versus the GFS versus the HRRR, we're running into the same kind of differences with all of them. I think that even if you wind up with the wider precipitation shield that the HRRR has, which is kind of what the NAM had back yesterday, even if that happens, the amount of liquid precip that's being generated here is so small that it can't really make a difference. So I think the way I'm handling it is that I'm covering for the possibility that there could be a coating to an inch or so of snow, mainly on colder surfaces, mainly on grassy surfaces. See, if this were a system that were generating, say, half an inch or 3/4 of an inch of liquid with the cold air that's aloft, then you could wind up correcting that bottom part of the atmosphere fairly quickly. You got the cold air aloft, but without the precip to help cool the column down, it's going to have a tough time to bring those temperatures down at the surface. So that's it. That's really all we have, because after that, we're going to have a couple of chilly days here in the Northeast and Northern Mid-Atlantic states, and then it's going to warm up going into Friday and the weekend. And we may have to go at least 10 days or maybe 2 weeks before we see anything resembling a change. So I don't know. I'll try Joe one more time, see what's going on with him. The Skype music is ringing. Da 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 da. clearly Mr. Rayo is not there right now, so something's going on. Well, the line is open for him to call whenever he's set. And let's get started tonight. So, looking at the watches and warnings, we've got actually have winter weather advisories up for parts of eastern Kentucky. We haven't said that very much this winter. Southern West Virginia, Western Virginia, looks like pretty much right along I-81, and in northwestern parts of North Carolina. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is up in northwest Montana and northern Washington state, where we have various winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings up, and also some flood warnings up for the counties along the immediate coast in Washington state because of the next weather system coming into the Pacific Northwest. So looking at WPC's rainfall forecast for the next 7 days, this takes us to next Monday night. You can see some pretty hefty rains being indicated by WPC from Arkansas northeastward through southern Illinois, Indiana, into Ohio, into northwest PA, western New York, and parts of northeastern New York as well. Looks like some solid 3 to 5 inch rain amounts there in that run southwest to northeast. Kind of tells you that there's a ridge off the southeast coast, because you notice that there's dry conditions in much of central and south Florida, and then out to the east into the Atlantic. You don't really have a whole lot of precip here to play with, and that upper high is going to warm things up considerably, at least up into southern New England, and maybe even in points further north than that before it's all said and done. Also, very busy out in the west, where we have our deep trough, and that's producing 5-inch plus rainfall amounts over the next 7 days from northwest California up the coast of Oregon and into Washington state. Lesser amounts as you go into eastern Washington and Idaho, but still pretty bullish there. 3-inch plus rainfall amounts, liquid amounts, because much of that is going to be in the form of some heavy snow. And also up in the Cascades, you can bet the barn here that this is going to also be some hefty snows. I always look forward to the winter weather advisories that are up for the Cascades for 24 to 36 inches of snow. Those are the best kind of winter weather advisories, not 2 to 4 inches of snow, but 24 to 36 inches. So looking at the satellite loop tonight, you got a few things going on. And of course, in the Northeast, you have this system that is now exiting Lake Huron and moving eastward toward the St. Lawrence Valley and running northeast from there. And this, of course, produced that upper trough that swung through, that we got some light snows out of it overnight in some places. And now we're waiting for the next round of energy that is already on its way, and you can see it here. It's kind of dropping in across Missouri and in through Illinois, and you have a little bit of a stream here, and I do mean a little bit of a stream running from Mexico, just south of Baja California, across South Texas, and into Alabama and Mississippi. There just really isn't that strong tropical feed here. I would, this system could actually would actually be a really decent rainfall precip producer and snow producer if we had a little bit more of an inflow coming in from the subtropical jet there. But it's just, there's hardly anything going on. Look how clear it is from Virginia down into Florida. I mean, it's bone dry off the southeast coast, bone dry up to about New York City and the coastline there. So, you know what? You're going to have to work with whatever you got, and it ain't much. And it's this upper air shortwave that is swinging eastward. And we also have a shortwave that you can't really see on this shot yet. It's up off the frame that's dropping down out of Canada, and that's part of the northern jet. And in the meantime, you also have this energy that's coming into the Pacific Northwest with all that rain that we're seeing in that region. So it's a matter of how much of a shortwave you've got coming out. It's not going to phase with that northern jet. It's going to phase too late and too far east, which might catch parts of Maine and definitely will catch parts of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but it's not going to catch areas from southwest Virginia northeastward into southern New England and even into southeastern New England. Right now, seeing some snows coming in off Lake Ontario through upstate New York, east and northeast of Syracuse, and some of that is streaming into parts of Vermont and New Hampshire. Really not showing a whole heck of a lot. Here's the beginnings of that short wave that's dropping east-southeastward and is eventually going to generate that area of snow in eastern Kentucky and into West Virginia and southwestern Virginia for Tuesday. And it's busier in the Northwest, a ton of rain and snow coming into Washington State, and you've got the snows also going on through parts of Idaho. Always deceptive here because of the mountains. You kind of lose the precip from one side to the other, but this is actually a fairly impressive setup. So checking out the latest surface map, we've got the 21Z surface map, and there's a weak weather front that's moving through at the moment. It's rather poorly defined, and that frontal boundary trails down to a weak low in southwest Arkansas. So that's part of the equation here, that lower pressure moving to the east-northeast. And you can see that the air here behind this front isn't especially cold. I mean, we've got readings that are generally in the 40s and upper 30s. Big deal. In fact, it's in the 20s heading back and 30s back through Minnesota and the Dakotas. So there's an absolute absence of true Arctic air. That's bottled up, way up into Canada. Just bringing up the surface up here, where we've got temperatures running below zero during the afternoon hours. But you know what? You expect that up in this part of the world. The real Arctic air, if we push it all the way north, I didn't realize this has obs going all the way up north. But look at this. We're up in the northern parts of Canada. Now you're seeing, temperatures minus 22, minus 24, minus 27, minus 23, 26. So these are all daytime temperatures here with what limited sunshine they have this far north to no sun at all when you get up toward the north coast here. But still, all your Arctic air is really just bottled up in this region, and there's no real way to get it down here until we can get a solid change in the upper air pattern. So let's just take a look. I want to show you, by the way, WPC's probability of 2 inches or more of snow. And notice, I'm going to just bring that 2-inch line back. Notice that for the coastal areas, and this is where I have extended anywhere from a coating to an inch. I guess if they had the probability of at least an inch, we might see some numbers show up for the coast. But the lowest value that they have on their site here is 2 inches. And you see where the higher probabilities are in the mountains of West Virginia and parts of westernmost Virginia near the West Virginia state line, and then running up north from there. There's nothing showing up here for New Jersey, for Long Island, for Southeast New York, Eastern Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware. Because I think really, if there's going to be anything, it'll be a coating to an inch or so, and mainly for grassy surfaces. It's kind of funny. I've always said, with dealing with these weather systems, that I wind up working just as hard or even harder sometimes for these coating to an inch or so's than the bigger ones. The bigger ones, you can just you see it and you just put it down there and you sit back and wait. But when you're figuring out the nuances here with these smaller systems, and when you're dealing with weak upper air short waves, and does it phase, doesn't it phase, all these other questions come into play. And then even in a case like last night, where the radar actually kind of bubbled up a bit last night in some places, and we saw parts of North Jersey get an inch of accumulation or so. Again, mainly on colder surfaces, other places getting less. So look at the upper air, and it kind of really defines the problem here with respect to what's happening for tomorrow. You've got I'm going to change the color. Let's go to red. And so, you've got this southern shortwave here. It's not completely in the picture, but there is a northern stream feature that's dropping into Minnesota. You've got a shortwave that is moving through southeastern Canada and eastern New England that we saw on the satellite moving into the St. Lawrence Valley this evening. And running through this, you'll notice that southern shortwave kind of stays separate. This is tomorrow evening at 10 o'clock when that northern stream feature comes down, but it's still back through here, and your southern stream feature is now moving off the Delaware, New Jersey coast. The trough here is pretty broad. If they were phased together, if you had a much sharper trough, that northern energy getting involved, this could have wound up being a nice maybe 3 to 6, 4 to 8 inch snowfall for a good portion of the northern mid-Atlantic to southern New England. But I just don't think that's going to happen. These two streams stay separate. They really just kind of phase during Wednesday, right in here. Even at this point, it hasn't quite caught up yet, but it's in the process of catching up. And this is going to impact, this area here up in Nova Scotia. And meanwhile, it's just colder and drier coming in behind it. When you look at the way the NAM has treated this on its surface map today. Hang on, I got to get rid of this pen. And so, looking at the NAM, it really is this kind of tight little ball. Just roll it backwards. And by the way, that's always a good forecast trick to do. I mentioned it a few times. Roll the thing backwards. You can see where, how it evolved, and then roll it forwards. But here you have that little low. You see how it just kind of bubbles up out of nothing almost. You get that area of snow. It's just this compact ball of precip on the NAM model that gets into southern New Jersey, southernmost PA, kind of skims Long Island, and then clips southeastern New England, and then it sort of blows up a bit when it runs up into Nova Scotia and southern New Brunswick. The HRRR model at 18Z, which is a good one you look at, the 6, 12, 18, and 0Z runs of the HRRR actually go out to 33 or 34 hours. Even if this is right, where it has a slightly more expanded area, it's got a bigger ball of precip, pretty much. And it's, along the coastal areas, you see it's rain changing to some snow. This is at 10 o'clock tomorrow night. That precip is light. There really isn't much to it. If you look at the total accumulated precip here, you're talking about maybe 2 or 3 tenths in South Jersey, down into Maryland and northeastern Virginia. If you compensate some of that for rain and changes over to snow, you cut it in half, you're talking about a coating to an inch or two on colder surfaces at most. And at least as of 10 o'clock, the much of Long Island, northern New Jersey, into southeastern New York and southern Connecticut, you're talking about liquid amounts of under 5/100ths of an inch of precip. What are you going to do with that? Not very much of anything. So you know what? This is what it is. It gets out of the way. We say goodbye to it. And then we start to look at the longer range. So the battle in the longer range has been this persistent trough in the west. And at least from what we've seen, this, only the occasional connection of cold air from the polar vortex, and you just kind of see it here. This is for Tuesday night. You do have a little bit of cold air from Canada that gets involved and bleeds southward, and that's going to make for a cold Wednesday and Thursday. But then what happens? Well, the trough is going to drop in the two things are going to happen. Deep trough drops in the west, big ridge pops up off the Florida coast, and you see it right here, this big upper high that pops up, and that creates a solid west-southwest flow for Friday into the weekend, and you have some energy here that is rolling into the west coast, big ridge up along 160. You don't want a ridge there, you want a trough. You'll notice how when you get, we've talked about the fact, because we saw this back in November and through the first part of December, trough at 160, trough in the eastern part of the United States. Ridge at 160, ridge in the eastern part of the United States. So clearly, we don't want a ridge there. That's got to go away. And as we move through the weekend and into next week, that upper high is just off the southeast coast of the United States into Monday. Starts to flatten out a bit as we move into the middle part of next week, because we do see some energy swinging eastward late next week. And then that lifts out and your ridge tries to pop up. Now, notice toward the end of this run, okay, This is the new GFS, by the way. The GFS over the last couple of days on various runs has hinted that some change may be in the offing. And actually, this particular run might be the first one in days where we've seen it like this. But it actually does make an attempt to bring the trough in the east. And notice it brings the trough now toward 160. That's really important. You got a trough now approaching 160. The ridge that was out at 160 now moves more toward the west coast. And of course, you can see that there's a flow here coming down out of Canada, a bit of a polar vortex there in northwestern Canada. You also have a strong vortex off of Newfoundland. Fire hose across the Atlantic. I really would like to see more traffic out in the Atlantic so you can get these storms to kind of back up a bit when they move off the East Coast. But this at least is a much better, it's a much more improved look than what we've seen. And this is at January 22nd. Usually, when I've noticed in the past, it doesn't always work out this way, but it does. Some of the time, it actually does. When you start to see the GFS hiccup on some runs where it brings in, it starts to show change in the long range. It's usually at the point that we're about halfway through the pattern. So if you want to date the beginning of this pattern change from when the last time we had cold air around here of the Arctic origin, which would be probably around December 18th, 19th. That's when that cold air mass came in and out. So from that date, the 19th to the 31st is 12 days, where 6 days is 18. So add 18 from here gives you January 24th. So this kind of is indicating that maybe that's at the point we'll start to see some meaningful change, or at least in the process of some meaningful change may start a few days before that. We'll see, but I have not seen what it's done at the surface, and of course, in the longer term, it really doesn't matter too much because obviously, once you get past day 6 or 7, even before that, you oftentimes see changes, and I wouldn't be shocked. You're going to see changes here in the longer term in terms of what it shows on the surface. There's your low. Actually, the GFS on this run's got a little bit more of a wrapped up low there, southeast of New Jersey and south of Nantucket. Although I love how it gives Long Island rain, and it gives New Jersey snow, and it gives Southern Connecticut snow, but no, with a 520, less than a 528 thickness, it's got Long Island in rain. I don't know what that is. It's been doing that in New Jersey a lot lately too. But it's got a 997 low. That's going back to what I said earlier. If there's going to be more than just a coating to an inch on colder surfaces, you're going to have to really grind out some liquid precip. This particular run doesn't quite do it. It probably brings it close, but it doesn't quite get there. Then we've got that little shot of cold air that gets down into, say, Virginia, northernmost North Carolina. And then, of course, with the high going out off the mid-Atlantic coast, and look at those southwest isobars. I mean, it's just where's it going to go? Temperatures are going to shoot up come Friday into Saturday. And your next low is going to run up northeast into the middle Mississippi Valley and go west of the Appalachians. That might mean for some snow and ice, as the GFS has indicated, maybe from parts of Kansas, northwest Missouri, into Iowa, southern Wisconsin. It has actually some ice for Chicago and southern Michigan. And then your low winds up going just west of the mountains, almost a west side Alps runner here. This is going to bring some really warm air up the East Coast, or at least up into southern New England. Could probably see temperatures reaching into the 60s from New York City south and west for sure. Come Saturday maybe, and possibly Sunday. It's kind of got the low going by. Sort of interesting how it builds that high, that 1041 high up south of James Bay, which brings 60-degree temperatures in New York City and probably ice and snow middle and upper Hudson Valley. If this verifies, which we don't know it will, but this is possible here. Maybe this high to the north winds up being a little stronger. We'll see. And then that goes out. And going forward, again, until we can get that trough to come back into the east, your cold air is going to want to go more to the west. Actually, at least starting to see some Arctic air coming in the longer term into the plains and into the upper Midwest. Now, perhaps we get out past day 10, we start to see it spreading out more into the east. No guarantees from the management here because we still have a lot of work to do. And of course, you get out to 384, and that's when it naturally has something close by. But you get the idea, folks. The bottom line is we have to do a big repair job on that. On that upper air. It's got to change. It can't hold on to what it's been. I just want to take a look at the European here, which has been no great shakes in terms of a model. I just want to see what it has today on its surface map. I guess something must have come up because he's usually pretty good about being around for showtime. But hey, you got stuff to do. You got stuff to do. The European kind of wants to run the low up east of Detroit, and you can see the isobars are pushed to the east, so it's a little bit further to the north, and the high to the north is not quite as strong. And then by Monday, the low is long gone. The high to the north is still there. Then you got another low. I got to give this a closer look when I'm just looking at it for the first time today. Sometimes I spend my Mondays catching up on messages and comments. And by the way, for those of you on YouTube, I don't always get to the comments right away, and I apologize for that. I try to make an effort to do so, but give it a day or two. I do eventually get back to them. But if you're on the chat, if you ask a question and I can't get to it, just send it to me, or possibly just put it in. Put it in on one of the comment sections on the video, and I'll try to answer you. And if you're on Patreon, it's a no-brainer. You can see the European here, the big ridge in the east, probably even stronger than what the GFS has. And then it gradually flattens out as we go later into the forecast period. So fingers crossed that we see that for snow lovers anyway. You're going to want to see change coming at some point, and it may happen after we get past the 20th. Here it is. Just want to show you in terms of snowfall what the Weather Service is doing. So you can see there's some big numbers in upstate New York, way up north of I-90, but most of the amounts are generally in the coating to a couple of inch range, some slightly higher amounts as you get up into Maine and in parts of New Hampshire. And of course, your big amounts right now are running in the Northwest, in the Cascades, where we've got prints of over 110 there east of Olympia, and 121 right up in the northwest corner of Washington State near the Canadian border. I don't know what specific point that is. And you also have some big numbers in parts of in northern Idaho and into northwest Montana. Just for laughs, I want to just see something here. I love pulling up these forecasts. Heavy snow this morning in the passes. Blah, blah, blah. Winter storm warning. Let's see what they're talking about. Winter storm warning for 6 inches to 3 feet. Snow level 4,000 feet. Additional to 3 elevations above 5,000 feet, 3 feet or more. All right, so it's kind of a typical snowstorm for them. So that pretty much kind of wraps it up here, folks. It's just sort of a quiet situation. Let me just take this off here, bring it back. I'll bring myself up full screen. I'll find out what happened to Mr. Rayo, and I'm sure it's nothing serious. He just probably something must have come up. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, Paul Roman, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Very much. So, by the way, don't take it to heart that just because the weather pattern is miserable here, that we're going to be locked into this through March. None of us really know where this is going in the longer term. You can you can certainly tell that by the fact that everybody's big forecast for the winter. What's the general rule? For making a winter forecast, it's always in the east, particularly in the I-95 corridor every year. It's always above normal snowfalls, below normal temperatures. We have to get to the point where these people just throw in the towel in October and start forecasting below normal snowfall and above average temperatures. Because I'll tell you right now, the minute they start doing that, that's when you probably stand a great chance of having a solid winter of unrelenting cold and snow. One of those rare winters that happens. Peter Bigger, could that high be stronger this weekend and make it colder? It could. I just don't think it's going to. I think it might be a little stronger and colder, and that could impact upstate New York and northern Vermont and New Hampshire, in which case there would be some serious icing for somebody there north of I-90. But I don't think it's going to make a difference this far south. You don't. If the NAO were only present right now, I could deal with that off-the-wall PNA, that off-the-wall Pacific North America Index, and that deep trough in the West, if we had a really strongly negative North Atlantic oscillation. That happened back in March of 2018 when we had the four nor'easters. We had extremely negative PNA, but we also had extremely negative NAO. And that was helpful because it allowed those systems coming in from the Pacific to get suppressed to the south, and there was just enough cold air, just barely enough, that we wound up with some pretty hefty snow systems in that month from those four nor'easters, particularly the second, third, and fourth one. Less so from the first one. Snow contractors are not happy, but let me put it like this, Reaver, with snow contractors, either a number of the guys that I work with, what they do is some of them bill by individual storm, and also some of them bill seasonal contracts. And usually, what they do is, they sort of balance it out, where some of their contracts are seasonal, some of their contracts are go storm by storm, so that at the end of the day it evens out. Some years you're going to have the seasonal ones pay off because there won't be a whole lot of snow to deal with. And some years you're going to have the storm by storm ones where you bill by the inch. Those are going to pay off versus the seasonal one. But either way, you wind up with a steady stream of income. That's how most of the guys do it. Did I see Dan the weatherman that SPC is expected? Yes, the SPC. This is something, even during the height of severe weather season, SPC does not usually throw this up there in their long range. And I've said many times, when you see SPC doing something in their long term, it's probably worth paying attention to. And they have done that on their day 6 and day 7, I believe. Oh, so I'm rolling it now on day 5 and day 6. So I hate that this thing rolls along. Hang on, I'm going to bring it up on the screen here. But this is something you don't see too often. But what's even more remarkable is the fact that you're seeing it in January. That's the thing that really gets me, is you're seeing this this severe weather risk in January, and this is part of the system for the weekend that's going to shoot the 60s up the East Coast. But look at this; they have a 30% already, indicating on day 5 a 30% risk of severe weather. So that's pretty sizable. That's enhanced. Okay, 15% is slight, 2% is marginal. Well, they got 30% already, and on day 6. They have a 15% risk covering the central and eastern Gulf states. And this is day 6 is going to be next Sunday into Monday. So they're already looking at what the models are showing with all that warm air flooding up the East Coast and into the southeastern part of the United States. There could be a fairly serious severe weather outbreak. I would definitely agree with that assessment. And as I said, they don't do that very often when they throw it up in the long range. So it definitely screams pay attention. Yes, next, Steve Lapointe, the AO is forecast to remain positive. The Arctic oscillation is forecast to remain positive for the next 2 weeks, which is not good for cold air into the eastern part of the United States. I'm seeing a few new folks on here tonight. We've got the POW blog. Welcome aboard. Nice to see you. I see Jimmy Z of New Jersey is on, and some of the regulars: Steve Lapointe, Mark G, Paul Roman, of course, Chuck Cardillo with his 2.5 inches of snow last night up in the Western Catskills. By the way, here's something I wanted to do tonight. Let me go back to the screen here. Hang on a second. But with all the talk of what's going on in Australia, why don't we take a look, which you can do on Tropical Tidbits, by the way. You can bring up Australia, and here it is. And one of the things that's going to be pretty important, let's go to the GFS, because we have more frames than I can put precip here. But let's roll back. Remember, it's summertime. It's also hurricane season for them, and they actually have a tropical system that moved into northwestern Australia, and that's helping to at least bring some rains into western Australia. There's also some rains up. Looks like some sort of tropical low sitting off the north coast there. I'm not 100% too familiar with how all this stuff works, but in the southern hemisphere, because we don't really look at it too often. But going forward here, we do have. You love how notice how that tropical low just kind of straddle. Let me just run it back a little bit. We got that tropical low that straddles the north coast there, and then as soon as it gets far enough offshore, it develops into a fairly intense little hurricane as it moves southwestward. And boy, that's real. I mean, that's out 9 days. It's got a 932 Cat 4, almost Cat 5 hurricane there coming into the coast. But at least it's bringing in some rain into Western Australia. Now, I'm not 100. I'm not really too familiar with the terrain, other than I know that the interior part of Alaska is very hot and very dry. So I don't know. It doesn't look like much of the rain makes it in there, and I'm not 100% familiar with exactly where all the wildfires are. But it does look at least like a bit more of an active pattern with respect to rainfall. I know there are occasionally we do see some folks from Australia pop up on the live stream, but you see where all the rain is. It's kind of on the periphery in the west and in the southeast, and of course here's your dry area running through the interior, and this is all through the next 16 days. So ample precip along the north coast and on the northwest and west coast, the southeast coast, and it does come in fairly far inland from the west until you get into that dry zone. Let's look at temps. So we got 2 meters shaded. All right, so clearly it's hot. Okay, clearly. All right, so let me get, let's go back through here. We're at 384. I want to start where we are now. So here's, this is today, and you've got big numbers here. So at zero, you know what? I don't know. 0Z translates. I'm not sure how it translates to what time it is there. I'm just going to go with look at this. So whatever 6Z is, it's in the height of the afternoon. So you got temperatures showing up. 40 is 104. So 30 is 86, 35 is 95, 40 is 104, and 45 is 113. So you're looking at temperatures well over 100 in that interior area, and you'll notice where you're getting that tropical weather is where you see these temperatures that are in the 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. So that's mid 70s to around 80. So those cooler numbers are all rain induced. And there we go for Wednesday, up over 100. Thursday, well over 100. Look at that, 45. So that's 113. It's still holding at 113. I mean, this is just incredible. Hot stuff. Oh, look at that. We're out at going into day 6 from coast to coast. And this has been going on for weeks now. So I'm going to just take a look. Let's look at the anomaly. That I think at least will give us a fairer indication of just how above normal it is or isn't. because it's all fine and dandy that temperatures are up over 100, but if they're supposed to be up over 100, then it sort of takes away from the extremeness of it. But you can see there actually is a fair amount here that even in the area, some of the areas where it's shown to be hot, is actually running a little bit below average in some places, and particularly in the west, which is going to be the western part being helped along with some tropical rains. There's that narrow strip of above average temperatures later this week through parts of Australia going into central Australia. Southern Australia is actually showing below average temperatures, and so is the north coast. Very interesting. So it's really hot in the middle, where it's hot and dry most of the time, but it's not above normal everywhere. So it's a little deceptive. It's a little bit deceptive to say that the scorching heat wave part of it, if not all of Australia's forecast is above average or below average. But look, to be fair, I don't. This is an area that I don't know too much about in terms of how the weather behaves. So I would rest assured that you just when you're hearing the stories, it's always good to kind of go and at least take a look to see if what they're saying actually matches up meteorologically. I really would love to talk to somebody that knows Australian weather far better than I. Maybe they'll hear that we discussed it on our live stream tonight and maybe jump on tomorrow's. If you are from Australia and you're watching, we'd love to have you, talk to you so you could explain maybe a few things about what's going on down under. It was fire that rained down from the formation of pyrocumulus, Earl Warren. That's right, pyrocumulonimbus clouds created by intense heat driving air rapidly upward and smoke plumes from wildfire. Heat-induced thunderstorms, which we get in the western part of the United States, the dry areas of the western U.S. Every year, and it's quite a phenomenon to see these pyrocumulonimbus clouds. And we spoke about this last night. Joe and I was telling him about years ago when we had the wildfires here on Long Island in Suffolk County. Even though they were small by comparison to what happens out, say, in Hawaii, the fires were so intense. I was shocked at how strong the winds were near the area of the fire. I mean, we were getting gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour at a time of year where you just don't see wind gusts. Even when the sea breeze is blowing, you don't get gusts that high. But the fire and the intense temperatures created its own little weather world there, the pressure gradient and the temperature gradient, and the wind just went nuts. I'm not, and that was on a small scale. So look what happens when you have it happening on a big scale. Yeah, Timothy Veltman, 113 is below average. You don't want to live there. Well, that's in the middle. That I know the interior of Alaska is it's kind of like the Sahara in most. It's bone dry. I mean, it's not a shocker that it heats up that high. But at least they're getting some relief with tropical weather, and there's some indication. I was reading from a post from a forecaster friend of mine who knows far more about this than I do, who was saying that the way the old Nat and Julian oscillation out there is behaving, it's going to favor tropical cyclones to form in north of Australia and then move southward. So that would be a big positive to bring in heavy rains to help get rid of some of the wildfires. Jeffrey Mara, as a child, smelling wildfires from Canada, where there was a northwest flow. Yes, and I think we also had that not too recently, back months ago, during the fall, I believe, if I remember correctly, we had some wildfire issues coming down out of Western Canada as well. These are nature's. This is nature's way of clearing old brush and bringing new life forth. Granted, it is pretty violent, and in this particular instance, it's pretty extreme. One of the issues that comes up every time we get something like this is, should we be building in these areas? Should they, should we be populating these areas with with homes. And I don't know about Australia. I know in California where some of these wildfires happen, they happen. Some of these homes were, we were talking about high price homes. Uh, Very, very nice neighborhoods. It's horrible to see that you get, all this destruction, of course. But, the question probably needs to be discussed about, where do we build here? Just like we discussed the questions of whether should we be building on the Atlantic seaboard or on the Gulf Coast because of the threat for hurricanes. I mean, these are really important questions and policy questions that need to be tackled, because if you keep building homes in these areas, over the course of time, destruction is going to, you're going to see more and more of it. It's just plain and simple. All right, so we're coming up on 7:47. We had a really nice live stream tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. I guess Mr. Rayo had something to do, so we'll try to get him back on tomorrow. In the meantime, we've got the app updated. Got my snowfall forecast up for Patreon members, such as it is. Not a big deal, but it's there. So Patreon members, make sure you check it out. And we'll be back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock with another live stream. Peter Bicker, can I pull up the surface obs from the blizzard of 96? Okay, and okay, hang on a second. Will find it hard to believe that Australia that dry with water all around it with no. Well, Bill, they do actually have some high terrain up in parts of Australia, so it's not flat from one end to the other. There is mountainous terrain in parts of Australia. That probably, in the southern part, I believe that's where you've got mountains down there, and of course that sort of isolates the interior. So Peter wants to see the blizzard of 96. Let's do that really quick. And by the way, if you'd like, you can go to go to my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel, I have my broadcast from the morning of the blizzard of 96. But we've got the surface map, and let me just widen it out a little bit. So if you want to see a surface, folks, that is really something that you would, if you're a snow lover, you really want to see this. Okay, let me just switch. That's Mr. Rayo's page. There we go. But this is what the surface map looked like the day before. This was Saturday, January 6, 1996, where you have at 21Z, so at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a low on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, inverted trough up the Appalachians, and a big Arctic high. And I'm talking an Arctic high here, one centered in eastern North Dakota, the other high center north of Lake Ontario, the high built down the coastline, and just moving it along, you'll see that the low runs up into eastern Tennessee. Your high kind of holds in place, doesn't go anywhere. That's your Arctic air and your block working overtime. Your surface low is the primary low in the mountains beginning to weaken, secondary low developing along the coast, and that is going to become eventually the main low. And you see it here, pressures falling off the Carolinas. By the time we got to 10 o'clock Sunday morning, it was snowing all the way up north of New York City and up into southern New England. And what happened was you actually had this warm advection snow that came up and put down a quick 8 to 12 inches on the ground by late Sunday afternoon and evening, and that was from the advection. Then there was a bit of a break, and then we had to wait for the upper features to kick in for the second round of snow that came Sunday night into Monday afternoon on the backside, and that put down the second foot. But this is what it looked like. 983 low stalled off the Delaware coast and then kind of stretched out east-northeast. You still have Arctic cold air kind of anchored in there in southeastern Canada, even though the high actually weakened somewhat. But at this point, of course, there's so much cold air that's gotten drained down. Look at the temperatures, by the way, down in the Carolinas, the Carolina coast by Monday morning on the 12th. We're down in the low 20s. and you had 20s and low 30s down into Florida. This is what happens in a true blocking pattern with an intense storm off the mid-Atlantic coast. And then that low is taking its time. I mean, it literally took 2 days to play out before finally, by Monday evening, the snow came to an end at my house, but the low was still offshore, and it took another handful of hours to get it far enough out of the way so that weather conditions could genuinely improve. So that was at least what the surface map looked like for the blizzard of 96. And again, if you want to see what I looked like back in 1996, 23 years ago, just take a look on my YouTube channel. I've got a separate playlist on there that's got just my some of my TV videos on there, and the Blizzard of '96 is there. Someone found it, and I'm so glad. As I didn't know that it was still out there. All right. So I think that is it for tonight. The Blizzard of '96 Reaver was on the 7th and 8th of '96 of January of 1996. Um, can I go to that website? Okay, I just did, David. So, yeah, if need be, I mean, tomorrow we could maybe I could spend a little bit more time on it, and we'll take a look at what the upper air looked like. All right. So have a great evening. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it, and we'll get Rayo on here tomorrow, because if we're going to talk about the Blizzard of '96, he really should have some input on that. All right. Have a great night. Good night, everybody.